Hello, I'm Hallam-Baker with the Komodo Group, and I'm here to talk about a project I've been working on to make email secure. In this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the motivations for the project and the type of objectives that we're trying to meet. I'm also going to be providing a brief introduction to the tools, the strong cryptography that we're going to be using to make email secure. And this is because in the past few months I've been getting an increasing number of comments from the general public asking me about how crypto works and why isn't it deployed and how could we apply it to secure email. And of course the reason that there is such a lot of interest is this man, Edward Snowden. At 29 he was a contractor with the National Security Agency and obtained 50,000 documents, or in excess of 50,000, highly classified documents describing the NSA's global intercept capability. This is, from a technical point of view, it's a breathtakingly brilliant and comprehensive technology and infrastructure that allows the NSA to view almost every imaginable form of electronic communication. Now, whether or not you believe that the US should have that capability, the US is not the only government that is in that game. The Russian government, the Chinese government, the Iranian government are all engaged in very large, very comprehensive cyber information warfare capabilities. And whether or not you're comfortable with the idea of your government attacking and intercepting your communications, you're probably not so comfortable with the idea of a foreign government doing the same. And it's not just governments. There's organised crime, and there are terrorists, all taking advantage of the fact that the internet has got too little information security and has become a permissive environment for attack. The balance between civil liberties and national security has been argued ever since I started working on internet security over 20 years ago, when I started working on the web with Tim Berners-Lee at CERN. That set of fights is sometimes referred to in the community as the crypto wars. And the leader of the Stop People Using Strong Crypto faction was this man, Louis Freeh. It was a nasty and somewhat bitter dispute. But rather than repeat that, let's skip forward to what ended the crypto wars. It wasn't a sudden realization that civil liberties should trump national security. The reason that we have strong cryptography built into the foundation of the web is this graph. This and many like it appeared around 1999. This one came from The Economist. And it's showing the predicted rise in the value of internet commerce. Internet commerce began in about 1995 when SSL was deployed. By 1999, internet commerce was worth over $500 billion and was growing rapidly. Today, the category internet commerce barely has any meaning because all commerce, whether it be somebody making hobby crafts and selling them on Etsy, to multi-billion-dollar aircraft purchases, is touched by the internet in multiple ways. Strong cryptography enabled the web to enable online shopping and online banking, online brokerage, auctions and marketplace. None of that would have been possible unless people could trust the web to communicate information securely. And so that's the reason that I believe that we should be looking now to add security to the internet's other killer application, email. Almost all of us use email every day. Most of us spend more time doing email than doing web. So why aren't we making email secure? What might be the benefits of adding security to email? Well, one advantage that we'd have right off the bat is that when you get a message from your bank, You'd know it came from your bank and not from some group of con men in Nigeria. Doctors, lawyers and accountants will be able to use the web and the mail to send confidential client information without having to worry about it maybe being disclosed to a third party or seen by the ISP. And utilities will be able to send invoices to customers directly by email rather than send them an email telling them to log into an account where they can find out how much they owe. And of course, a lot of data today that is sent by letterpost could be sent by email if only the sender could trust it to be secure. Not that letterpost is necessarily all that secure. Here's one of my utility bills that I received this morning, and as you can see, the US Postal Service has its customary attack. But more than that, if we can secure email end-to-end, I'll explain that term later, that can serve as the foundation stone on which we can secure all the remaining internet protocols. Web security is a special case because it only solves the problem of securing the communication with an end user and an organization. To solve the email security properly, we want to be able to allow one individual to send a secure mail to another individual and not rely on the trustworthiness of any other party. If we can achieve that securely, we can then secure internet chat, voice, video, every other communications that is person to person can be secured in the same way. And the reason that Snowden is relevant to this discussion is that the Snowden disclosures have provided us with a window of opportunity. Contrary to what you might gather from the press, changing the internet is really, really hard. The internet does not change of its own accord. When I was working with Tim Berners-Lee at CERN, we spent hours and days thinking about how we could make the web deploy more quickly. And that was when it was already growing quite fast. The fact that the deployment of the web was not an accident, it was worked for. Today, over 2 billion people use the internet. And changing the internet is hard. You need to have the right technology, but you also need to have engagement from a terrifically large number of people to make it happen. Now, it turns out that people wouldn't do that to stop their money being stolen by organized crime or to stop terrorism, but maybe concern about the NSA intercept capabilities will do the trick. At any rate, we have, for the next few years perhaps, a short window of opportunity to try to secure email once more. So in the rest of this series, I'm going to first describe how cryptography provides security and describe the tools of my trade. And then I'm going to look at existing attempts to apply those tools to secure email and see how they already meet the needs of over 1 million users. And then I'm going to be looking at the question of, well, 1 million users is good, but on an internet of 1 billion people, you can't call this technology successful until billions are using it. And so there's clearly some technology gap that's not being covered there. What is that gap? How do we cover it? And then in the final 2 installments, I'm going to be describing my approach to solving those problems. Not necessarily because mine is the best or the only solution. What I'm trying to do here is not to say use Phil Hallam-Baker's scheme to secure email. Instead, what I'm trying to do is to convince people that this is a problem that can be solved with existing technology, and that people should be going to Microsoft and to Apple and to Google and demand that those technology providers solve it. All the technology I'm describing here is open technology based, as far as I know, on unpatented approaches that can be applied without intellectual property constraints. This is a system that I believe can and should be deployed within a few years. So, with that said, let's start on cryptography. Now, cryptography and security sound like they're really high technology, difficult to explain, quantum physics-y sort of things. Well, maybe so, but I think that strong cryptography is something that could and should be taught in high school. Because understanding cryptography is like civics for the internet. If you don't understand how cryptography works, you can't understand how to protect your information in cyberspace. If you can't do that, well, you can't protect yourself in the modern world. I'm going to be talking about two types of cryptography. First, I'm going to be talking about traditional symmetric key cryptography, and then I'm going to be talking about a very interesting advance called public key cryptography that allows us to do some very interesting things. But before we talk about cryptography, we should be talking about security, and in particular CIA. In the security world, the acronym CIA, well, it means something else of course, but it's a convenient mnemonic for the three things that are really important: confidentiality, integrity, and authentication. Well, confidentiality, preventing your secrets being disclosed, well, everybody understands that that's the most important thing, right? Well, actually, no. Let us consider two attacks. In attack one, Mallet, the bad guy, Mallet's always the bad guy, Mallet has found out the contents of your bank account and knows that you've been spending all this money at all these naughty websites. That's bad, right? Well, of course it is bad. But now consider attack two. Mallet can't see what you've spent, but he can spend your money for you. That's an integrity attack. Which do you care more about? Breaching your privacy or stealing your assets? Integrity is actually a lot more important in most real-world information security applications. Authentication, well, you probably familiar with this when you present a username and password on the internet. Authentication is the process of verifying the identity of another party. And it's critical for two reasons. First of all, authentication allows access control. If we know who somebody is, we can look up what they're allowed to do and decide whether they are allowed to do it. It also allows accountability. And this is really one of the things that went wrong in Snowdonia. Why was a 29-year-old contractor allowed access to 50,000 documents without any logs being kept and reviewed? There was a failure there of access, but there was also a failure there of accountability. Now, when we're looking at symmetric cryptography, there are many very simple schemes. You might have seen something like this in a serial packet when you were younger. It's a very simple cipher. In the simplest version of this cipher, the two wheels are fixed. They're just stamped out and they don't even rotate. To encode a message, you find the letter that you want to encrypt on the disk, and if it's on the inner circle, you use the letter on the outer, and if it's on the outer circle, you use the letter on the inner. It's a simple substitution cipher. In cryptographic terms, we've got two components. One is the algorithm, which is how we mix up the letters. In this case, it's a substitution cipher. We substitute one letter for another. The second part is the key, and the key tells us which letters to substitute for other letters. As the cipher goes, well, this is an absolutely appalling cipher. You can bake it with pencil and paper in a few minutes or hours. Natural language like English has a regular structure to it. The letter E is the most commonly occurring letter. So a substitution cipher can be solved quite simply by looking for what the most frequently occurring letter is and guessing that that's an E. And then looking for the next most frequently occurring letter and so on and so forth. And it may take a few trial and error, but eventually most messages can be decrypted within a very short time. The Alberti cipher is weak because it's a weak algorithm and it's a very simple key. Making the key longer makes the cipher more secure. This is a Jefferson Wheel. It's named after its inventor Thomas Jefferson, the same Thomas Jefferson who wrote the Declaration of Independence. You can't quite see it in the photographs because this is a picture of a very early Jefferson Wheel, possibly one that Jefferson himself might have used. But the device consists of a rod with a series of discs arranged along the rod. Each disc has the letters of the alphabet written around the circumference in a particular order. And each disc can be twisted to one of 26 positions. So in order to encrypt a message, you first have to arrange the discs in a particular order that is known to the sender and the receiver. You then turn the discs so that you can read out the message you want to send along a line, and then you rotate the column of discs by one position so that you can read out the next line of text, and that's the ciphertext that you send through the medium that might be intercepted. At the other end, the receiver does the reverse. This is actually an almost perfect cipher, provided that the permutations are correctly chosen and you only use the device to encrypt a single line of text. Once you start to use the same order of disks to encrypt multiple lines of texts, then structure from the original ciphertext, from the original plaintext, starts to show through into the ciphertext, and an attacker then starts to be able to break it. So in modern terms, so this is a strong cipher, but it is not a practical one in modern terms because you need to you need to already have exchanged a large amount of key material in order to use it. But it was perfectly adequate for Jefferson's day because the messengers were riding by horse, and so the risk of interception was certainly possible, it did occur, but it wasn't a routine occurrence. By the middle of the 19th century, however, the telegraph starts to appear, and then radio, and suddenly commercial communications and military communications are taking place along channels that can be intercepted relatively easily without the sender knowing that the interception has taken place. And that gave rise to a new generation of cipher machines that made use of mechanical and electromechanical techniques. Now, the most famous one of these ciphers is, of course, this one, the Enigma Machine, which is originally developed in 1919, just after the end of World War I, and it was used by the Nazis in World War II. The reason it is so famous is actually because it's flawed. Breaking the Enigma Machine cipher, which took place at Bletchley Park in the UK, changed the outcome of World War II. Without the ability to read the German communications, Britain would have been defeated before the entry of the US into the war. However, the Enigma Machine may also have played a role earlier on in enabling the Nazi tactics that allowed them to invade Europe. It's hard to see how the Blitzkrieg strategy could have worked without the ability to communicate rapidly the situations from the battlefront to the headquarters. And the fact that the Nazis trusted their cipher machines so absolutely was one of the features in their early success, just as it was also a major reason for their later downfall. By the 1970s, electronic computers started to replace mechanical systems in almost every field. Mechanical crash registers started to become replaced by electronic ones. Calculators were replaced by electronic ones. And the same thing was happening in cryptography. The US government saw the need for a standard approach for encrypting government documents and held a competition that resulted in the digital encryption standard being announced. For its day, the digital encryption standard, or DES as it's known, was a fairly secure cipher. It was certainly more secure than any of the mechanical systems that it replaced. DES has 70 quadrillion, that's 70 million billion possible keys, which in the 1970s was way beyond the capabilities of the machines of the day. However, when you have a technology that doubles the power of the machines every 18 months, it doesn't take very long before 70 quadrillion possibilities becomes a practical possibility. And in 1999, a machine called Deep Crack was shown at the RSA conference, which had broken DES in a matter of hours. The demise of DES led to the Advanced Encryption Standard competition, which was, the winner was announced in 2001, and AES is today the basis for almost all commercial cryptography. AES has 128-bit key size rather than the 56-bit key size of DES, which sounds like, okay, we've doubled the strength. Well, no. Every time we add a bit to a symmetric cipher, if the symmetric cipher is a good one, we have doubled the strength. So a 56-bit cipher has double the strength of a 55-bit cipher. So when we went from 56 bits to 64 bits, we had doubled and 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 doubled. Doubled 8 times. And then from 64 to 72. AES keys are so secure that breaking even the 128-bit key, the least secure one, by brute force is far beyond the capabilities of any imaginable computer we could create on Earth, even if we rendered the whole planet into one great big computer system, and every atom in that computer was a computer breaking AES. There's also a 256-bit key for people who are completely paranoid. In modern cryptography, we don't worry about the risk of our algorithms being broken by brute force. They might, however, be vulnerable if somebody can find a clever way to break the algorithm. So, in summary, symmetric cryptography is very secure. A 128-bit key is more than enough for any imaginable attack now or for the foreseeable future. It's also very fast. If you're running a modern computer, like the one behind me, that can encrypt messages as fast as it can read data off a disk or send them through the internet. So using strong cryptography has almost no impact on performance. But there is a big disadvantage. I can only communicate with somebody securely using symmetric cryptography if I have already shared a symmetric key with them. And that is possible in a diplomatic context. It's not so possible in ordinary use. Am I going to go into my bank and ask them, oh, I need to do online banking. Could you give me a key to use? And then we kind of like, we'll write them down. And well, that's not going to work. Symmetric cryptography allows us to communicate securely, but only after we've first distributed a strong key. If we don't have a strong channel to distribute our initial key, all our subsequent communications are vulnerable. How do we distribute the key? Well, one solution might have been this one. This is the Royal Yacht Britannia. It was launched in 1953. It's 400 foot long and it cost £2 million in the money of the day, or 80 to 160 million pounds in today's money, upwards of $250 million. a quite astonishing amount of money for a country to spend on a party boat for the royal family at a time when most of the country was still under food rationing. It might have had another purpose, which is distributing key to all the embassies around the ports of the British Empire. I would imagine that the cryptographic officer would attend the parties and return home to the embassy at the end of the day with a briefcase strapped to his wrist containing the ciphers that will be used for the next year or two. A very strong way of ensuring that the communications can't be intercepted by the enemy. If not, what a monstrous fraud on the British public. This is, of course, speculation rather than evidence, but that's just how the cryptography world is. Speculation and conjecture always play a major role in trying to work out what is going on, because we're always dealing with partial information. I don't wait until I have proof that somebody is trying to attack me before I try to defend. What we do know, however, is that James Ellis, who was working for GCHQ, that's the British version of the NSA at the time, developed what he called no-key cryptography, and we now know as public key cryptography. And that this was developed to address the problem of distributing key to all the embassies around the world. The reason that we know by a different name is that all the work that took place at GCHQ had to be then rediscovered in the public domain by scientists working at MIT and elsewhere. In particular, Whit Diffie, Marty Hellman, Ron Rivest, Lena Edelman, Adi Shamir, and many others who redeveloped all the techniques that GCHQ had invented. In public key cryptography, instead of having a single key that's used to encrypt and decrypt, we have two keys. One key is used to encrypt messages, and another key is used to decrypt. And a public key cryptographic scheme has the particular property that the public key used to encrypt the message cannot be used to decrypt messages. And this means that I can make my encryption key public, and anybody who knows my public key can now send me an encrypted message that only I know how to decrypt, because only I know the secret key. Public key cryptography has another interesting application, which is digital signatures. Again, we have two keys. We have a secret key that is used to sign a message that only I know, and a public key that can be used to verify the message that anybody can know. Today, every web browser has public keys embedded in the browser that tell it how to recognize documents that are signed by particular parties known as certificate authorities, which are part of the infrastructure that make internet commerce work. How does it work? Well, mathematics, and I really can't explain the full workings of a scheme in a short podcast. But to give you a brief overview, we start with a problem that is difficult to solve. For example, the discrete logarithm. If you're familiar with mathematics, you're familiar with a logarithm, with an exponential. Multiply x by x by x by x by x. That's an exponential. And there's another thing called logarithm that inverts the function. Well, if you do modular arithmetic or clock arithmetic, it turns out that calculating the exponent is still quite quick and easy. But reversing the process suddenly becomes very difficult. So calculating e to the x mod n is cheap. Calculating the opposite is very expensive. Unless you've constructed the system in a very specific way. You see, one of the things about modular arithmetic is you can have inverses. And if you have the inverse, well, turns out that, staggeringly enough, an inverse also works for exponents. Yeah, I didn't think that would happen until I started looking through the maths and the proofs. And if you choose the modulus of your modular arithmetic cleverly, well, you can have a way that allows you to work out the inverse very easily. Public key cryptography is the technology that we use to secure the web. SSL, Secure Socket Layer, also known as Transport Layer Security, TLS, allows us to create a secure tunnel across the internet that is invulnerable for an attack. An attacker can't get into that tunnel and modify the packets that are going back and forth, and can't see the contents of those packets either. The security of the tunnel that we create only depends on the trustworthiness of knowing the public key that was used to create the tunnel in the first place. And when you use the web, you sometimes see the padlock icon in your browser. Well, that is telling you that SSL is in use. And if you go to some sites, you will see a green bar. Well, that tells you that the SSL is in use, and the party that you're communicating with, their identity has been verified in such a way that you know that they're accountable. That if they do something bad, well, law enforcement knows where to knock and serve the search warrant. So, public key cryptography allows us to establish secure communications. Well, why can't we use that to secure email? Well, people have tried. In fact, people have been trying to apply public key cryptography to email ever since it was invented in the public in the mid-70s. Today, almost every email client that you can use already has public key cryptography built into the fundamentals. And it's simple to use. It doesn't take very much effort to use it. But almost nobody who uses email knows that that option exists. And of those who know it exists, almost nobody uses it. I have worked in the information security field now for over 20 years. I'm working on email security. I receive maybe one encrypted email a year. So there's a big gap between the potential of this technology and what we actually achieve. Why is that? Well, that's the question I'm going to be trying to answer in the next installment of this presentation. Thank you for watching, and please watch the next one.
And one more thing. Please hit the like button and please subscribe to my channel. The more people watch these videos, the more evidence we have of demand for email security, email privacy. And that helps me when I'm negotiating with Microsoft and Google and Apple and all the other people who I need to talk to make this happen. So please click the like button and please subscribe and send a message to them. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you for hitting the like button.